Hey, it's Max. Who doesn't like themselves a good old Z-Class? The so-called first modern tram in Melbourne, they've been trundling around our network for the better part of 50 years. Or at least, the Z1 and 2 classes have, but they're gone now. This video is about how I designed my LEGO Z3 class, Melbourne's oldest trams in revenue service. Before I get started, I do have to once again mention that I'm yet to build this in real life, more on that later, and these are all renders made using Bricklink Studio. At the end of my last video, I said that the next one, this one, will probably be the last video on my com engine. Unfortunately, I've been extremely busy and I needed an easier video to make, and since the Zs were also made by com engine, I suppose I wasn't entirely incorrect. So, my Z3. The design process started out as a tangent to my A class, which by the way is much more complex to design than you'd think, and I'm still working on it. The Z, A, and B classes all have the same wheelbase and the same size bogies, so you'd think I can just nick the chassis from the A. But because of the way things worked out, the Z needed to be half a star offset from the bogies. If I was still using the standard L-gauge track, this would have been a lot harder to achieve cleanly. However, because I have my weird gauge thing going on, and the bogies work differently to traditional ones, I can just put them on without hassle. One of the first things I did was model the doors, which despite looking similar to the A and B classes, are not in that they are shorter. I didn't actually end up making them shorter on my Z, however I did move around some of the plates to make the appearance of it being so, and to differentiate it from my B. Another difference is instead of just a single door at the front, there was a double door with a single door at the back, which made designing the cab extremely difficult. Speaking of the cab, it was, as usual, the hardest thing to design, and it took me a number of months to get it just right. The front bit of the cab is, in very basic terms, like the B class, except moved forward by the length of a door and squished down with a more extreme taper. I knew that I was going to base the cab off of my B class's cab for that reason, but what I didn't know was how I was going to do the cab's roof. I started out with an on-grid construction that took inspiration from my B class's design. One of the issues with that design, other than being ugly, was the transition from the curved trim on the sides of the roof to the front. On the B class, there was a hard corner which meant that I could build the cab on-grid much more easily. Once I had that horrible thing out of the way, I had an equally horrible idea to taper the walls slightly. On the real Z class, the top half of the walls have a very slight angle to them, and I thought it would be a perfect idea to try and recreate it. This gave me an excuse to scrap this mess, and to replace it, I chose to extend the sides of the roof out. In an unforeseen twist of events, this ended up creating a cab that looks an awful lot like PCC 1041. 1041 still exists and currently resides at Hawthorne Depot, along with Karachi W Gutter. However, I surprisingly haven't been there in about 8 years, so it's not like I did it intentionally. Anyway, since that clearly wasn't working, I mildly rounded it off with a straight slope and pressed on with the roof and interior. I quickly drafted up the interior with the same micro seats as my B class. Not too much to say about that. The roof, on the other hand, has a few nice details. You of course have the general stuff that I've modelled, and then there's the weird desto on the side for the route number. I extended the roof out over the cab in a snot construction, which is a much better solution than my original design. There's also the pantograph, except when the Zs were originally delivered, the entire tram network was operated with poles, hence the pole stub on the opposite end. I also experimented with weathering the roof by making it darker around the pantograph, like you would see in real life, but the way I did the effect looks subpar at best, so I scrapped it. This is the first tram that I've designed that I've added undercarriage details to, excluding bogies. It's not impressive in any regard, being only 4 bricks, but it's still a nice touch. After that latest design iteration, I made what is probably the biggest backflip in the process of designing the tram, in that I removed the taper on the walls. There were many reasons for doing so, not least because the way I had done it made it collide with the interior seats, and the outer doors weren't even attached, let alone the fact that the roof looked way too narrow because the taper was so extreme. Either way, this modification allowed me to clean up the ends of the roof especially, although I'm a little bit disappointed that it's no longer tapered in 3 dimensions and that I couldn't continue the curve for as long. The modification also created an interesting situation with how the roof is attached and removed. I tried to add removable roofs to all of my trams, to varying levels of success, and for my Z class it called for a somewhat bizarre solution. To demonstrate this, we will have to take a quick tangent into the real world so I can show you how it works. Here we have the abomination of a prototype I built mainly to test the cab. The way the roof is removed is directly related to how I had to attach the front and rear doors, represented by these, to the cab. To get the half-stud offset I needed for the doors, I had to use 1x2 plates attached to the tops of brackets, or in this case, modified 1x2 plates. The brackets have hollow studs which fit around the tubes between anti-studs of 1x plates, in this case 1x2 plates. However, none of these are actually normal 1x2s. From right to left, there's a hinge plate used to angle the cab, and its mate is also used to provide a stud connection to the roof, followed by two other hinge plates that aren't used to hinge, but rather to provide an extremely compact connection between the two door segments. And lastly, a 2x2 corner plate, which acts like two 1x2 plates sandwiched together. A similar design without the extra hinge plates is used on the other side for the single door. You might be asking yourself how this ties into the roof, and that's where the magic happens. Because the plates above the double door stick in quite a bit, it interferes with that side of the roof. As a result, I had to take a layer of plates out of the roof structure on only that side, meaning that the whole system interlocks. To remove the roof, you have to swing the side of the cab out of the way. Only that side can rotate as well, since the other side of the cab is connected to the driver's side window, even if it doesn't look like it on the digital model. And if you think I'm stressing the parts by doing that, I accidentally did something really smart with the cab taper. To explain, we have to travel back into the wonders of the digital world. It's difficult to explain with words, but the points that the cab is hinged from makes it so the sides are both 6 studs long with a 1 stud offset. Although, for the sake of argument, let's just say that I thought ahead and used Pythagoras to work it out in advance. Another side effect of removing the taper was that the windows suddenly looked way out of proportion. From the beginning, I didn't love the fact that I was using them, because they fit the B class better in terms of shape, proportion, and detail, but I went with them anyway because at the time I couldn't come up with an adequate alternative. I ended up going with the relatively new 1x3x3 windows on their side, which I initially didn't like because they came as one complete piece, whereas the real Z's windows are split in two. The two main advantages of going with them made them winners though, those being that I could change the frame's colour to imitate the frame on the real Z class, something that I could not do with my B, and that this design necessitated that the windows be offset towards the middle somewhat, which is exactly how the real Z's windows are. The snot panel also necessitated a layer of tiles underneath it, which doesn't look the best until you realise that the Z class has a few flutes on its side. The groove on the tiles goes the wrong way, but honestly that's being pedantic, like nothing else about this is. From here, I only made a few minor changes to the design, so it was pretty much done. Once I deemed it complete, I decided to make a few variants of it in different liveries and with sometimes period correct details. As with all of my trams, I built the basic Z class in a stripped down PTV livery, just colouring the doors yellow and adding the grey trim at the bottom, which to be fair could be used for the Mark IV livery. The yellow even matches better. The first livery I reskinned was the grey livery, which in of itself is a stripped down Mark II livery. Almost half a year ago now, I put out a community post poll of select Z-class liveries to see what you guys like. The PTV livery won by a landslide, which I was not expecting, and even if you combine the grey and Mark II liveries votes together, they don't even get second place. That instead goes for the Met livery, which is a true classic in Melbourne, for which I designed a variant of the roof with poles. So far, I've made all of those liveries, and just about the only major livery I haven't at least provisioned for is the original Z-class livery of brown, 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 and you guessed it, slightly darker brown. Hey, guess what? Good news! I'll be getting the Z-class this year. Yes, you heard me right. However, it will probably only be until next year that I make a video on it, because I still need to design the PTV livery for it, and of course film it with the real thing. It is the small issue of one of the parts not being available in the right colour, but I can use temporary replacements until it is. Unfortunately, that upcoming showcase video does not mean that I'll be making another explainer on my Z-class, so hopefully I've covered everything well in this one. Recently, as in 4 months ago, this channel unlocked memberships, and that means this channel is ever so close to being fully monetized. So if you love what I do, the least you can do is subscribe to get it to the 1k milestone, or even share my videos with your Tram, or of course Lego loving friends. And if all of that isn't enough for you, chuck a membership in. I'm still figuring out the whole thing. With the membership you'll get early access to uploads, which will be coming more frequently, I promise, as well as some other perks like the odd additional video, and perhaps most importantly of all, sneak peeks on what I'm working on, and at least currently, it's a lot. And as an extra incentive, you'll be helping to fund more of my creations. Since I recorded that segment, a new member has joined. An insanely massive thank you to Jay for your support. As a bonus for those of you who stuck around, here's a draft of an articulated Z-class that I drew up. This may have been what the B1 class looked like if Transport Minister Steve Crabb didn't have a go at the Z-class's pointy nose. I don't plan on finishing the design because the half-stud offset bogies that you might remember from the start of the video mean that I have to redesign the entire articulation, and I've already spent enough months perfecting it for my B-class. Unfortunately, Tazia is on an unsolicited holiday to Japan, so no credit goes to him in this video. And with that, thanks for watching, see you next time.